We've just had the 65th anniversary of the writing or publication of George Orwell's perhaps most influential novel, 1984. In it, Orwell pictures a totalitarian regime in which the ruling party, headed by Big Brother, maintains absolute control over England. He does this by rewriting history, continual propaganda, but most of all, continual surveillance by the feared thought police. Their most powerful tool is to watch people in their homes via the telescreen, a two-way television that allows them to see right into the living room. As Orwell explains, in the past, no government had the power to keep its citizens under constant surveillance. With the development of television and the technical advance which made it possible to receive and transmit simultaneously on the same instrument, private life came to an end. And as Winston Smith, the novel's hero, comes to realize, to liberate himself from Big Brother, from the totalitarian state, he needs a place of secrecy. He needs a place of privacy from the prying eyes of the thought police. For Orwell had come to know that privacy is necessary for freedom. Now, this all strikes us as chillingly up to date. Just to give a few statistics, in London, there is one CCTV camera for every 25 members of the population. There are 2 million cameras in the UK as a whole. And after recent revelations on WikiLeaks and by Edward Snowden, we know that the secret services of the US and the UK nearly all the time collect private emails, listen in on conversations and record them. They even can have the ability to listen in on your Skype call or your FaceTime. So when you're next video conferencing to the relatives in America, you can wave and say hello to the man in Cheltenham. But if the government isn't spying on you, then private firms are or will be. I have a friend in the city who knows that his firm, a bank, tracks his location all the time through the GPS on his phone that the work provides. Advertising is tailored to every time you go on a website. There have been billboards in London that scan your face and change their message as you pass, given what they think you want to hear. We're soon going to be recorded by Google Glass, people with spectacles, and by drones so small you won't be able to see them. Never has it been harder to live in society and stay private. Now, should we be worried by such an outcome? And we're going to, as a nation, face this question again in law, because Theresa May is going to bring to Parliament again attempts to give the police more powers to surveil the population to fight terrorism risk. And I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that. That's a very tough, difficult debate to have. But the point I want to make is it may come as a shock to you, but the psalm we just read says that God's knowledge of us makes the NSA and GCHQ mere infants in the pursuit of knowledge about people. His knowledge is so complete, they look rank amateurs. And again, like a nation, we as individuals have a choice. Do we embrace that knowledge of God's knowledge of us and welcome it, or do we reject it and wish to stay free and private. And the choice we make, amazingly, decides the fate of our very souls. So turning to the psalm, David delights in the knowledge of God's knowledge of him. And we'll go through these 4 stanzas or verses. Verses 1 to 6, the all-knowing God. Verses 7 to 12, the all-present God. The all-creating God in verse 13 to 18. And the all-holy God in verse 19 to 24. So the all-knowing God, verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. David says that God's knowledge of us is total. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows our inner life, our inner thoughts, for he has searched us. Our thought life is an open book to him, even from afar, verse 2. No part of our lives is hidden from him, be it in public, when we go out, or when we lie down to sleep in private. He is familiar with all of it, verse 3. And nothing, amazingly, we decide on the spur of the moment comes as a surprise to him. He knows what we're going to say before we say it. Verse 4. To use the big theological word, David is saying God is omniscient. He is all-knowing. But this isn't knowledge that is just mere facts stored in a big database. This is knowledge by someone who is in relationship with us, but knows everything about us. Now, how does David react to that realization? It would be tempting to reject that idea completely and say, I want to be private. I don't want God to know me. How dare he know my every thought? Like Winston Smith in 1984, we might want to be private to be free. But this isn't David's reaction at all. He delights in God's intimate knowledge of him. Verse 5, you hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty to attain. Rather than cramping our style, David knows that God's presence brings security and comfort. His picture is a bit like a policewoman putting her hand on a blind man's shoulder and leading him across the road. She stops the traffic behind and guides him in the front. God has both our back and clears the way ahead. You hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. David is lost in worship and awe at this very thought. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. So what does that mean for us, God's knowledge of us? How does it change our lives? Well, first it means that we should give up the pretense of hiding anything from God. We're very good as Brits at controlling our emotions. That causes all sorts of problems, particularly because we then think we need to get drunk to have a good time. But in our spiritual lives, it can cause a problem because we think that we can carry on that public face of not expressing much and keeping things secret with God. But David says that's a fool's errand. You might keep things private from those outside, but you cannot keep anything secret from God. So don't bother. confess openly to him. Tell him your joys and sorrows. They will never surprise him, but he delights in hearing them. So first, don't try to hide things from God. Second, it means that every moment of every day is meaningful. It has importance. It has eternal significance. It's easy to fall into the trap to think that we don't matter. We're not a celebrity. We don't have an important job. We don't order people around. And to think that, therefore, our lives are pretty meaningless. But this psalm says exactly the opposite, because every moment you live is in relationship to an eternal and loving Creator, the ruler of the universe. Jim Packer says it like this: living itself becomes an awesome business when you realize that you spend every moment of your life in the sight and company of an omniscient, omnipotent Creator. So we may be young or old, bedridden, wheelchair-bound, unemployed, an immigrant. In the world's eyes, we may not be much. But because we live life in God's sight and company with the gift of prayer, everyone matters. All life has significance. And then third, we can draw comfort from what David says about God's protection and his sovereign control of our lives. He guards us and protects us to bring about his sovereign purpose. And for the last 20 or so years, when going to work, I've cycled in London. Perhaps a rather dangerous and foolhardy thing, particularly if you're my mum, thinks about. How can I do that? I do it in the knowledge that God is guarding me, hemming me in front and behind. If I have an accident, I know that it's for his purpose. So yes, I take care and so on, but I know that he is guarding and protecting me. Someone has even said very strongly, every Christian is immortal until the moment God has decreed for their passing. And that comes out from this psalm. You can be confident in God's provident care of his children. So that's the all-knowing God, verses 1 to 6. Then we come on to the all-present God, verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the morning, of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. So David now tries a thought experiment. He imagines whether he really can get away from God. Is it ever possible to be truly alone, to be truly private? First, he thinks about the possibility of rising to the heavens, soaring to the top of the sky like an eagle. But no matter how high he rises, God is there. Then he thinks about going down to the seabed, the very depths of the ocean. But no matter how far he dives, like Mr. Cameron, God is there. As we thought about earlier, what you might say is if he took a helium balloon to the edge of the atmosphere, or dived in a submersible to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, can we get away from God? David's answer is no. What if we try circling the earth itself? If I rise on the wings of the dawn, that's if I go as far as I can to the east, to this rising sun. Or if I go in the opposite direction, in the west, if I settle on the far side of the sea, can we avoid God? Can we get away from him? Every point of the compass, God is present. Even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. As we read earlier, the prophet Jonah tried something similar some 100 years later. He tried fleeing from God, who told him to go east. He took a boat as far west as it was possible in his day to go, to the edge of the Mediterranean. But he couldn't cast off God's pursuit. In the fish, as he was swallowed after the storm and being tossed into the ocean, he said, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me from the deep in the realm of the dead. I called for help, and you listened to my cry." So in David's thought experiment, he fails to shake God off with distance or depth. He then tries darkness. We humans can't see in pitch blackness, so David says, "If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me." Maybe God can't see us there. But once again, David's imaginary fugitive is thwarted by God's all-seeing eye. Even the darkness will not be dark to you, verse 12. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. The night offers no more of a hiding place than the wings of the dawn. God is all-present. Now this, of course, is a great comfort for Christians, for it means that there is nowhere on the earth, or even on the moon or Mars, that is truly God forsaken. There is no place of spiritual or physical darkness where he is not sovereign, caring and protecting his adopted children. There is no place where we need to be truly afraid, for he is always with us. George VI said something very similar when he quoted these lines in the radio broadcast on Christmas Day in 1939. "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I might tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way.'" But to those of us who are not Christians here, this idea of there is no place to hide from God should be frightening. As Jeremiah says of God, "Who can hide in secret places so that I cannot see them? Do I not fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord." Deep down, we all know that we have done grievous wrong in God's own sight. We have violated even our consciences, let alone his holy law. We have all sinned and fallen short of his glory. So when confronted with the prospect of meeting this holy God, it's no surprise that humans naturally want to hide. Adam and Eve did this immediately in the garden after they sinned. They heard God coming and hid in the trees and sewed fig leaves around them, for they were ashamed. But it's this same instinct that John says will be with us all at the end of time. The pride that rejected God will instantly disappear, and people will want to hide in terror. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called on the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne." David tells us that there is no place to hide from God, but we're tempted to believe it, not to believe it. On that awful day, it will be undeniable. So, we've seen the all-knowing God, and we've seen the all-present God. Now verse 13, the all-creating God. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. David continues with his thought experiment of where could one possibly go from God that he may not be present. Is there anywhere that can be private? He thinks, what's the darkest, most private, secluded place we've ever known? And then it comes to him, his mother's womb. This secret place in verse 15. Maybe, just maybe, God respected our privacy in the womb. But of course, David knows that his musing is just rhetorical. If anything, in poetic terms, God is more active in the womb than elsewhere because he is creating not just a baby, but a life to come, a very soul itself, my innermost being. And he does this while traversing the boundaries of time itself. He saw my unformed body. Even before his mother knew she was pregnant, God knew the baby inside her. He even knows and plans the day of our death before we utter our first cry. Verse 16, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. So how should we react to that idea of the all-creating God? Well, first, we should respond in praise, as does David, verse 14. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. We haven't got time to do more than scratch the surface of think about the beauty and complexity of our bodies. Just two amazing facts about you. In the DNA, in one of your cells, is around 7 billion bits of information. That's more than in 4 complete copies of the Encyclopedia Britannica in one cell. If the DNA in one cell was fully uncoiled, it would reach about 2 meters. There are at least 10 trillion cells in your body. No one's quite sure because there are so many, nobody can quite work out how many. There could be up to 20 trillion cells in your body. That means if all the information in the DNA in all your cells in your body was unwound, uncoiled, it would come to 20 billion kilometers long. That will take you 66 times back and forth from the Earth to the Sun. That is all the information packed into your body. We then have people who think that this came about by chance, that random mutation produced all that information. It is laughable. It is childish. It is a fairy tale. Praise God, because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But the next thing we need to do is reiterate with David that God is forming and knitting the child in the womb. From our very conception, he knows us. And what is the definition of a person in that sense? It is somebody known by God. Isaiah says that he names us in the womb. He knows us. We are his handiwork. Therefore, for humans to violently end the life of God's image in the womb, whom he knows, whom he is creating in his image, is not just murder, it is sacrilege. In this country, we kill just short of 200,000 infants in the womb every year. That is around the same casualty rate as the First World War. The nation was moved when all those red poppies were placed around the Tower of London last year in the centenary of the First World War. But that is the same equivalent of the harvest of 4 to 5 years of abortion in this country. Our government is deliberately ignoring the law and protections and safeguards that were put in place in the Abortion Act in 1967. It is deliberately blocking the prosecution of doctors who are willing to kill girls in the womb just because they were girls. If you're not angry about this, something is wrong. Pray that this land would become repentant before God's patience is exhausted. So returning to David, he begins to meditate on the vastness of God's intelligence. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. And it seems a bit like counting sheep. David starts to do that and falls asleep. But he promptly wakes up. When I awake, I am with you. But having snoozed, David's and been woken up from his slumber, David's mood seems to have dramatically changed. He now starts to meditate on the holiness of God. God is all holy. Verse 19. For only you would slay the wicked, O God. Away from me, you bloodthirsty men. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord, and abhor those who rise up against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Now, at first reading, those are shocking words. In perhaps what is the most beautifully poetic psalm in the Bible, people forget that it ends with that call to slay the wicked. Aren't God's followers meant to be merciful, not vindictive? Didn't Christ teach his disciples to love their enemies? How can this be included in the same Bible? And to understand that, we need to recognize several things. David has meditated on God's awesome works and character. So now he identifies personally with God's cause. David doesn't condemn his own enemies, but God's. The clearly wicked, bloodthirsty murderers, the blasphemers, the haters of God's self. But secondly, we have to recognize that if we are not angered by evil in this world, then our consciences have become too dull. We're not meditating on God's character enough. If what you heard just now about abortion does not make you angry, something is amiss. Surely you would want to thwart these bloodthirsty men. In the New Testament, we're told don't be angry, but in your anger, do not sin. Do not take personal revenge. Final justice is postponed, but not forgotten. We're to live at peace with all men, repay evil with good, pray for those who persecute us. But if we are indifferent and silent in the face of evil and wickedness, we condone its practice and fail its victims. Jesus himself expressed righteous anger when clearing out the temple of the money changers. His disciples remembered another psalm. Zeal for your house consumes me. The insults of those who insult you fall on me. He was deeply moved by the exploitation that he saw about him. He was furious that God's honor was being affronted. But David is a forerunner of King Jesus, who will one day return to claim the kingdom that is rightfully his. And when that happens, justice is the first thing that's going to be on his mind. As John writes in Revelation, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire. On his head are many crowns. It is false advertising for Christians to act as if God turns a blind eye to injustice. One day the true king will return, and justice will be the first thing on his agenda. So to conclude, we've seen that God is all-knowing. He knows us completely. He is all-present. He is everywhere we can ever go. He is all-creating. He made every part of us, past, present, and future. And he is all-holy. He is perfect in righteousness and justice. But now, as we thought about at the beginning, this psalm confronts us with this choice, with this dilemma, the two paths. On the one hand, we can delight with David in the knowledge that God knows us. We can seek to do his will with all our heart, yearn to be with him forever. As David prays in verse 23, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So that is one choice, the path of embracing God's knowledge of us. Or we can take the other path, that is to reject his rule, his knowledge, his presence, his love, where we can try and be private, where we can try to be free. And I think this is what many people, why many people reject the Christian gospel. They don't want to live under God's rules. They don't want to think that he is sovereign over them. And so they try to live independently because they want to live for themselves. We're born wanting to do that. Many of us choose to do that. You may ask, what's wrong with that? Nothing too catastrophic has happened yet to the secularists. They've got plenty of company. The problem is that there's this inconvenient detail that God knows everything we've ever thought or done or said, and will one day hold us to account for it. If you're worried about GCHQ spying on you, then listen to these words of Jesus. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you've said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs. He's talking about the final judgment when the books will be opened. All our thoughts and actions and words will be laid bare before God and the whole of creation. A very uncomfortable thought. If you just were to think about the recording tape of your brain just this morning and thought that I would put it on a player and play it in front of us all now, we'd all be deeply embarrassed. by what it would reveal. But judgment is going to be like that, not just in front of us, but in front of a holy God and the whole of creation. How do we prepare for such a day? How do we get off this path leading away from God? The answer lies in the cross, for in Jesus' sacrifice for us, he has borne the punishment that we are due. Yes, we are all going to be judged and found guilty, but those who have placed their faith in him are going to find that their punishment has been taken, that recording tape is going to be erased. The penalty has been paid. We'll then enjoy relationship face to face with God forever. But if we reject that offer of salvation, if we turn our backs on God now, he is going to confirm us in that choice for eternity. We are all going to be found guilty at judgment, but without Christ, we will be cast into outer darkness. And that surveillance tape of our lives will be on a continuous loop forever.